Chaque semaine, l'Extra Interview sonde les goûts cinéma et séries d'un invité surprise. Aujourd'hui, c'est le script docteur John Truby qui nous ouvre sa boîte à souvenirs et se raconte à travers ceux qui l'ont marqué. Cet expert de la narration et de la structure cinématographique corrige des scénarios pour Hollywood en toute discrétion depuis les années 80 et enseigne l'art du storytelling dans le monde entier. Il nous parle du mythe américain à travers le western, de ses premières larmes devant un grand écran et de la peur de la mort. So John, the idea of this interview is to try to tell your story through your love of cinema and TV series. And because we have to tell a story and you're the master of storytelling, how should we start?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think the idea of this interview is terrific.
Oh.
Because when you first mentioned this, I thought, what an interesting process to try to look at your own history through the films and the TV shows that have meant the most to you. And it really brought me on a journey of discovery that I would never have done normally.
So you've thought about it?
I've already thought about it, and I've already found it a very insightful process to go through. So just in thinking about all these things, which I haven't thought about for years, a lot of self-revelations. You know, I think probably the first place to start for me would be what were the first shows or movies that really caught my attention, that really made a difference. And for me, I was really quite young. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And at that time in the U.S., there were over 30 Westerns on television a week.
A week?
A week. And I saw all of them. The Western is America's creation myth. And it's the story we like to tell about ourselves, about how our country was formed. And this idea of the Western movement and the cowboy was very appealing to me because I grew up in a military family. My father was in the Army, and I adored my father, and I wanted to be like him when I grew up. So this idea of the cowboy, this fighter for justice, was very much something I wanted to be from a very young age. So then, you know, I jumped forward 8 years, and 1968, and you get all these anti-Westerns, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Wild Bunch, Once Upon a Time in the West. And these were just stunning to me. These totally shocked me because they took this basic philosophy that I had grown up with and this story that Americans like to tell themselves and flipped it on its head. These were stories that really talked about the cost of the building of America, and the costs were tremendous. And of course, this was right during the Vietnam War and so on. And then you get, a few years later in 1971, what to me was the ultimate anti-Western, which is McCabe and Mrs. Miller. And it certainly opened my eyes tremendously. And it really got me interested in the film medium, because not only was it revolutionary in dialogue, in sound, in visuals, it was also, I thought, revolutionary in story. And it was really the first time I could see the possibility of story in film. And that was then really highlighted even more a couple of years later when I saw for the first time Seven Samurai, which was so overwhelming to me that as I recall, I cried at the end of this movie. You know, this magnificent battle scene in the rain.
Was it your first big movie emotion?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. And that was where, for me, I really saw that film was what I thought was the ultimate art form, because it combined all the art forms. And that, I think, was when I decided I've got to be involved in this art form in some way. And
in some way, meaning you didn't know how?
I didn't know
yet.
how. I didn't know how. And so what I did was I got a job as an usher at an art house cinema in New York City called the Carnegie Hall Cinema, which is right next door to Carnegie Hall. And they would show 2 classic films every day. All of a sudden, I'm seeing things like Rules of the Game and Grand Illusion and Pepe Le Moco, 400 Blows, these sorts of stories that are not done in a Hollywood way. And this really expanded my understanding of how you could tell a story through film.
That kid that you were,
Yeah.
like, letting himself go into a story, do you still have it?
I'm often asked that question. People think that it must ruin your pleasure in watching film. In fact, it's the opposite. Watching a great film, watching a great TV show, because of the unique power that the film and the TV mediums have, it's part of that is sucking you into that world and into those characters and what they're going through. And I'm as big a sucker for that as anybody watching movies and TV today. I love that. But one of the things that has been so fascinating to me in watching the TV medium really come into its own in the last 15 years is this is where the greatest writing, I believe, in the world is being done.
I love to hear that.
I recently saw on an episode of Game of Thrones what was probably the most emotionally shocking moment I have ever seen in film or television.
If a man knows what he is and remains true to himself, the choice is no choice at all. He must fulfill his destiny and become who he is meant to be, however much he may hate it.
I want to help you. I'm the Princess Shireen of House Baratheon, and I'm your daughter.
Next scene, they take her out to be burned at the stake. And her father is watching.
Father! Father, don't do this, please! Father, no, please! Please help! Don't do this!
But what was so beautiful was how they set this up with this very intimate moment between father and daughter. I just couldn't believe this.
Don't do this! Don't do this!
Don't you think that sometimes, as a viewer, we might hate a last episode just because we just can't stand the idea of it to end? I've always thought I hate the end of Lost because I want to go back. And there is our own emotion. We are trapped in something. Don't you think it plays
Absolutely.
on the way
Absolutely.
we see it?
And that is why, for the vast majority of shows, they are designed not to end. They want that show to keep going on forever.
But we know it's going to end.
We know it's
still,
going to end, but it's like life itself. We know we're going to end, but we don't live that way. We live as though we're going to live forever. And so even though we intellectually know, yes, we have an end, emotionally we don't have that experience. And TV shows are the same way. We invest in them, we live through them to some degree. And then when they die, it's like, I don't want it to die. You know, I'm not accepting this. I'm not allowing this to happen.
And now we've talked about self-revelations and death. How should we end this interview in terms of storytelling?
But I don't want it to end. It's just like a great TV show.
Et la conversation ne s'arrête pas là puisque John Truby sera à Paris du 20 au 27 janvier pour sa masterclass sur l'anatomie du scénario.